Sometimes Konami makes mistakes, not only when it comes to making cards that end up getting banned, but also when unbanning cards that clearly weren't supposed to get off the list yet. In this video, we'll be going over all the times Konami messed up and had to put cards on the Forbidden and Limited list for a second time. And starting off at number 10, we have Solemn Judgment. This is a counter trap that can be activated when a monster would be summoned or a spell or trap card would be activated, letting you pay half your life points to negate either that summon or activation, then destroy that card. Judgment is a really great card. Being able to stop your opponent from doing any single action with no setup besides setting it is an amazing deal, even if it does cost half your life. Still, you'd be surprised that it actually took a while for this card to be considered problematic. The whole paying half your life points thing is trivial now, but it was actually a meaningful cost back when this card had come out, and it made people reluctant to run it for quite a while, even in formats with tons of things you'd like to stop, like Chaos Emperor Dragon and Pot of Greed. This wasn't just that people back then were worse at the game either, as even if you look at the way people play GOAT decks nowadays, Solemn is definitely not an auto-include in every single kind of deck there, sometimes not even in the side deck, and it's at 3 in GOAT. Still, Solemn definitely became way stronger once the game advanced, and there were more boss monsters and advantage engines you'd want to protect, leading it to getting limited at the beginning of the Synchro era. New extra deck types also made the card stronger, since soloing the summon of one meant it wasn't treated as properly summoned, and so wouldn't be able to be brought back from the graveyard later. Either way, Solemn would go on to get limited, then banned for several years. And by the time it came back to 1, there were already some balanced Solemns around, like Strike and Warning. Trap cards like this tend to become inherently less of an issue as the game speeds up, as they're often only played as side deck cards. In the case of Solemn, it's always nice as a catch-all choice, but you'd often be better with more specific counters to your meta. That's why Solemn could go to 1 and then 3 as the game reached the Link era and beyond. That said, it's been brought back to 1 again after so many years in a recent ban list. That's because as Konami cracked down on other side deck cards in recent ban lists, Solemn began creeping up in use again. One such card was actually Skill Drain, which followed a similar path, of being at 3, going to 1 for several years before being brought back to 3, becoming problematic again, and being sent back to the limited list. However, the reason why Skill Drain doesn't make this list is because it's never gotten banned at all, and even Solemn is a bit of a reach since it's been re-limited and it hasn't been properly re-banned yet, and we don't even know if it will, so it only takes the 10th spot on this list.
There, now no one will ever know.
You know what else people will never know? These amazing deals! Did you know if you head to TheDuelLogs.com you can get a mystery box with all kinds of TCG related merch, including some Yu-Gi-Oh cards?
Did you follow me out here?
The box has sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, a plushie, and many more. What do you think a deal like this would cost a normal person?
I must be hallucinating.
No, not $8,000, only $59.99. Buy more than one item from the store and only pay one small shipping fee for everything. And now, coming at number 9, we have Heavy Storm. This is a normal spell that lets you blow up all spell and traps on the field. Heavy and Dark Hole filled the same niche back in the day of being huge equalizers. Cards that were much better in getting you back into a game once you were behind. In that, they were much more balanced than Harpy's Feather Duster and Raigeki, which only worked on your opponent instead. And so, while they were incredibly powerful, they were kept around at 1 for large swaths of time. It could be argued that the presence of these cards actually made some formats healthier. With Heavy around, you don't really want to overcommit on back row if you can help it. Pluses were definitely less common back then, and so even just getting 2 for 1 by it could be devastating. So even if decks played a lot of trap cards, it was really unlikely for you to be staring at more than a couple of them at any given time. This sort of respect you needed to have made for way more back and forth games, and is a very interesting aspect of playing any format with Heavy, such as GOAT and Edison. However, this is definitely something that falls apart as you get further into the game's history. With cards becoming stronger, it becomes less likely for you to get by with the power of just a single back row. Like, imagine if your opponent has the potential to do powerful setups that end on a really powerful game swinger. If you set a single back row, you run the risk of it getting played through or popped by Mystical Space Typhoon, another really popular card. However, if you set multiple, Heavy Storm will set you back massively instead. This kind of conundrum would make Heavy really toxic as the power level of the game increased, and so it eventually would be banned for good after shifting between 1 and 0 for a couple of years. Although the TCG has kept Heavy Storm banned to this day, It could very easily come off the list any day now, as seen by how they have it at 1 copy in the OCG, where it just fills a similar role to Harpy's Feather Duster in the side deck. And at number 8, we've got Monster Reborn. This spell lets you target and reborn a monster in either graveyard. This is a pretty simple but powerful effect, and so it's no wonder the card was either limited or banned for the entirety of its TCG's lifespan. Reborn first got banned in the first ban list that addressed the Chaos monsters for real. Even if it couldn't bring back the most OP of them in Chaos Emperor Dragon, it could still bring back Chaos Sorcerer and Black Luster Soldier. This was certainly a huge step up from what the card was doing before bringing back a Jinzo or a decent beater at best, as these Chaos monsters had both good stats as well as effects that immediately affected the board once they came down. It'd go on to fluctuate between being banned or limited for a while. It's not a card you can play with in either GOAT or Edison, but it's legal in 2008 and 2009, as well as from the later parts of 2010 throughout the start of 2013. The impact Reborn would have on these formats is all pretty similar. It just added an extremely strong and sacky one-of to every single deck. Since it could even steal monsters from your opponent, it's pretty much never going to be a bad card in your hand, and either let you regain board position or let you go for an unexpected lethal out of nowhere. Even if the game was already speeding up at that point, special summoning conditions weren't everywhere just yet, making Reborn's power level seem way stronger, especially if you could bring back disruptive or recursive monsters. It'd come back into the game at the start of the Link era, where it was still strong but not really a problem anymore. By now, any good archetype worth its salt would be spamming special summons without the need of an unsearchable spell card. Not only were there countless versions of generic Reborns you could use if you just wanted to link climb, many archetypes got essentially better versions of the card built into their kits. It was by no means bad, of course, and the card coming back did lead to a lot of people being happy to play with it again, but it certainly did not pack the punch it once did. Reborn remains limited to this day, seeing a little bit of play, certainly a fraction of what it once did. And it could realistically come back to 3 in the next ban list and not change much of the meta at all. And at number 7, we've got Sangan. This is a level 3 Dark Fiend with 1000 attack and 600 defense, and its effect used to be that if it's sent from the field to the graveyard, you add any monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand. Sangan was a really good and an efficient monster back in the day. The fact that it floats from being destroyed in any way or tributed already made it an all-star for most decks of its time. Its stat line was also just enough for it to put pressure into an opponent starting 8000 too, which meant that they'd have to deal with it eventually, and it never feels good to spend removal into something that floats. That's not even getting into the fact that it searches some busted cards that the meta had, like Magician of Faith and of course Yatagarasu. Sangan itself was a piece of the dreaded Yada-Lock combo when paired with CED's board wipe effect. It would get banned in the very first ban list of the game alongside Witch of the Black Forest, which has the same effect but looks at the monster's defense instead. This little difference is what allows Sangan to creep back into the game eventually, as though searching for any 1500 or less attack monster was still very good. If Witch was allowed, it would get you a search for a boss monster like Dad or a Monarch instead, which felt much more problematic in that era. Still, while Sangan was allowed to be around for quite a while, we'd eventually get targets for it much more powerful than their status would suggest. With time, this card would get incredibly powerful targets like Rescue Cat, Summoner Monk, and Lone Fire Blossom, all of which are really powerful starters who were also limited on the ban list. This was also around the time where hand traps like Maxi and Effect Veiler would come into the game, but also valid Sangan targets. This utility would eventually be deemed too much and they would ban Sangan towards the beginning of 2013. This critter was only let off the list in 2017, but by now it had been eroded so that you weren't able to use the monster it searched during the turn it triggered its effect, making the card way less problematic. Not only that, but also the game had sped up massively by this point. So setting a Sangan turn 1 to let it get run over and search your starter certainly wasn't a viable strategy anymore. The card would see a little bit of gameplay in the Link era, since it can be linked off with Salamangreat Almirage, and then be used to search for a hand trap or an extender. However, its use is quite limited now, as it's definitely no longer the must-play staple it once was. And at number 6, we have Snatch Steal. This is an equipped spell which can only be equipped to an opponent's monster, and gives you control of it while it's attached. However, it makes your opponent gain 1000 life points during each of their standby phases. Snatch Steal is another power 1 of the game's early age. something that you'd probably get tired of hearing about by now. Coming out into the game already limited to 1, as most of the others, it stayed around for more time than you'd think, only being banned in a single format from 2002 up until the latter half of 2007. Of course, it was never extremely busted in these formats. Stealing an opponent's monster is like both using a removal spell and then a Reborn all on the same card. It's a very easy +1 in card advantage, not unlike, say, a Pot of Greed. And in lots of cases, it's even more impactful than the iconic pot. Snatch is one of the sackiest parts of any format that it's around in, being able to reverse most board positions and making having monsters with good effects on the field actually a huge liability. The downside of giving your opponent 1,000 life points every so often is definitely not enough, especially when considering that whatever you stole is likely to be hitting them for way more to make up for it. Well, sure, it's vulnerable to removal, unlike a Change of Heart. It just lets you keep that monster forever as long as you can dodge it. So you don't need to immediately convert what you got or kill your opponent for it to feel good. Having Snatch Steal around was definitely a design mistake for Yu-Gi-Oh! And it would be banned from 2007 all the way until 2015, where they would bring it back, thankfully for a single format. The card was definitely not ready to come out. It's a non-destruction out to several strong monsters at the time that also possibly just ends up killing you. It added a pretty swingy element that would otherwise be a quite balanced triangle format between Shadow, Cleafort, and BA. Still, that's not to say the card would never be allowed again. Ever since 2024, the card has been allowed at 1 in the TCG, and the OCG even has it at 3. It's funny because we finally reached the point where the card, being vulnerable to destruction, matters way more than being able to keep the monster forever. Duels don't last that long after all, and it's very likely that you'll just convert whatever you stole into a Link monster anyways. It's generally seen as a bit worse than Change of Heart due to this, and so it's either played as extra copies of the same effect or in decks that have equipped synergies like Mikanko, making this into another really safe pick to go back to 3 eventually. And at number 5, we've got Glow-Up Bulb. This is a level 1 Earth Plant tuner monster whose sole effect is that if it's in your graveyard, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard to special summon it, but you can only use the effect once per duel. Bulb was one of, if not the best tuners of its time. Having access to a tuner that comes back from the graveyard used to be incredibly powerful, since that meant you could set up a synchro by just having it in the bin alongside any normal summon. That was the reason why a lot of decks used to run Plague Spreader Zombie, even though its effect made you go down a card in hand. However, the Bulb just gave you a free body, with the chance of getting an additional plus if its effect milled something good. And while it is once per duel, Plague Spreader Zombie was effectively that due to banishing itself after 1 use anyway, so that was never that big of a downside. This card being a plant meant it's tutorable with Lone Fire Blossom, and its level means it's a target for 1/1, making it somewhat easy to access even as a one-of. It comboed extremely well with Dandelion's level 1 tokens, allowing you to spam Formula Synchrons to get even more pluses. Glow-Up Bulb ended up getting banned first in March of 2012, in what was the first really controversial case of Konami using the ban list as a way to move new product. While yeah, all of these interactions were great, plant combo wasn't really that big of a problem at the time. This was in the same meta where you had windups hand looping you and Inzectors popping your whole board after all. So that list banning both Spore and Glow-Up Bulb felt like a real slap in the face of the community, since they were just trying to get people to play XCs and stop using synchros. And to make matters worse, they wouldn't go back on this mistake and unban it until 2 years later in 2014. Though at least now it could be useful again in Shaddolls as a really good target to send off of Shadow Fusion. It would see play mostly in that deck as well as in strategies that really liked milling up until the Link era where it had to be banned again. This time preemptively because it's a really good target for Krishan Halki Fibrax. That said, while it had been a problem for sure back then, Bulb doesn't really have a reason to be banned if Halki Fibrax isn't around. And thankfully that problem has been dealt with ages ago. That's why it's been free in the OCG for quite some time now, and finally became playable to us again in a fairly recent ban list. Though it kind of lacks a home, at least for the moment. And now coming in at number 4, we have Zodiac Drident. This is a rank 4 Earth Beast Warrior XCs which can be made with either 4 level 4s, or by using a differently named Zodiac monster as the whole material. Its attack and defense are equal to the sum of the stats of all of the Zodiac monsters underneath it, and once per turn, as a quick effect, You can detach a material to target and pop a face-up card on the field. Zodiacs were once a tier 0 strategy in the TCG and OCG. It was pretty much the first case of you being able to get an awful lot off of a single normal summon with no extra setup whatsoever. Since all Zoo Xyz can be made for free on top of any other Zoo, that means even your Zodiacs with no on-summon effects can get you a search through Broad Bowl, a Reborn through Chakanine, and a material swapper with Tiger Mortar, and last but not least, of course, a really strong disruption in Drident. When the deck first came out, it had an insane combo that would go through Fusion Substitute and Daigusto Emerald to draw a ton of cards and still make a ton of bodies. But it was still tier 0 even once all of that nonsense was addressed with the banning of Norden. A single pop doesn't sound that scary nowadays, but it really wasn't something you could beat with every hand, especially if you were a Zodiac yourself. That led to a lot of people playing tons of ways to deal with Drident, such as My Body as a Shield, and even Pianissimo to stop it. Either way, after a few ban lists trying to soften the deck and not kill it, it was obvious that there was no way around it other than to ban Drident and Broad Bowl. The latter probably can't even come back today due to future-proofing issues, but Drident was allowed to return at the beginning of Master Rule 5 in 2020. Without either Broad Bowl or multiple Rat Piers, the deck really wasn't much to worry about by this point, and a single pop was pretty trivial to beat as well. That said, the set Phantom Rage would catapult them back into the meta overnight. So firstly, that set had the Tri-Brigades, a series of monsters that cheat out links from the Beast Tri-types by banishing cards from these types from the graveyard. While they were pretty good at filling the graveyard themselves, the Zoos would be a really nice way to help, since the summon of just one of them could mean up to 5 materials in the graveyard. Still, and perhaps more importantly, we also got Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder, which can be made on top of any Xyz as long as one battled this turn, and packs a really powerful, non-once per turn effect of detaching 2 materials to send every other card on the field to the grave. The Zoos essentially give you access to a 1-card Zeus complete with 2 or perhaps even 3 activations ready. Its summoning condition was also made trivial due to Borbo. Before, one of the weaker members, since its only real effect was being able to attack directly, now it could be used to make Zeus no matter what monsters your opponent had on board. This all made Tri-Zoo a bit too oppressive, so Konami would go on to address it by banning both Zodiac Barrage and Drident to curb how good the engine was. Drident would remain banned for another half a decade before coming back, but now with very little hope of seeing any play whatsoever. As in a world where Tri-Brigade has long been power crept and Ryziel Detonator exists, there's just no reason to make a deck with Drident in it anymore. And at number 3, we've got Fairy Tale Snow. This is a level 4 light spellcaster with 1850 attack and 1000 defense. If it's in your graveyard, as a quick effect, you can banish 7 other cards from your hand, field, or graveyard to special summon it. Then, on summon, you can target a face-up monster opponent controls and flip it face down. So, we've already seen how great it is to get bodies from the graveyard out with a Glow Bulb, right? It's a bannably strong effect by itself. And though Snow might not be a tuner, it's instead a level 4. Which gives you access to a ton of good Xyz monsters. Still, what really sets Snow apart is that while Bulb is once per duel, Snow isn't even once per turn. Heck, it's not even once per chain. It also comes with a very strong disruptive effect on summon of flipping a monster face down, in an era where Book of Moon was still on the limited list too. Snow is just the complete package, and it was a mainstay for basically all mill decks such as Lightsworn and Infernoid, as an additional layer of interaction you can get out of your random mills. Its light attribute also gives you a ton of ways to guaranteedly get it into the graveyard though, both with the aforementioned Shadow Fusion as well as Brilliant Fusion. Its power only increased in the Link era, as now it was even easier to convert its body and put it back into the graveyard again, even if you weren't going into rank 4s. This is not even getting into how Snow interacts with Thunder Dragons, a full archetype that benefits massively from its members being banished, and what was supposed to be Snow's cost became its biggest upside instead. All of this would lead Fairy Tale Snow to getting limited and then banned just a bit after the new wave of Thunder Dragon support came out. The card would remain in the list up until it randomly came off at some point in 2022. Though Colossus was still banned by now, and so its previous best archetype to pair with was completely kneecapped, it now had a much stronger deck looking to make use of it. Branded got to foolish it completely for free through Branded Fusion, which felt great. Then of course you had Tearlaments, the best mill strategy of all time, and possibly the best archetype of all time too. Snow was such a busted card that it would often be your choice of dump from Curious, a card which could send anything from your deck to the graveyard, and the versatility of it now made it by far the best choice. It represented Link materials to make Appaloosa, Xyz materials to end on a Dweller, and even just something to leave laying around to mess up your opponent's turn and almost assuredly prevent their lethal. It really didn't take very long to become clear that Snow wasn't okay to have in the game again, and so the card lasted a whopping 8 months before needing to be banned again, and it's not looking like they'll bring it back anytime soon. And at number 2, we've got Stein. This is a level 2 Dark Machine with an effect that lets you pay 5,000 life points to summon any fusion monster from your extra deck in attack position. Just one single look at Stein and you can already tell the card is simply not okay. Its effect is obviously one of the least future-proofed ones that you could put into the game, and it was very clearly only made because the designers had no idea what they were doing back then. Being able to cheat out any fusion was fine when the best thing your 5k life points could get you was a Thousand-Eyes Restrict. But as soon as Stein got some semi-decent targets, it became a huge issue. Those were Cyber Twin Dragon and Cyber End Dragon, the former being a 2800 double tacker and the latter a 4k piercer. This led to a very strong Stein OTK strategy being around, as though neither of those can kill by themselves. They represent 8,000 damage when paired with either Limiter Removal or Megamorph, allowing you to steal the game out of nowhere. It's very important to stress that OTK decks were absolutely not a thing at that point in the game, making this whole strategy a really big anomaly. It was surprisingly consistent as well, as not only did you have triple Stein, it was also searchable through Last Will, Mystic Tomato, and Sangan. This all led to the card being banned for a really large period of time, around 15 years actually, coming back in 2019. It now had much stronger targets in cards like Nature Exterio and the Last Warrior from Another Planet, which could shut down games by themselves. However, it was only available at a single copy, required extra deck space, and though it could be searched and cheated out, it often felt more trouble than it was worth. That was at least until the Tearlaments and Sprite archetypes came out, of course. The idea was that you could just play the one Cyber Stein and then mill it either by chance or with Sprite Sprint, at which point it could be brought back with Sprite Elf. You could then freely use its effect without having to worry about getting hit by an infinite impermanence due to Elf's protection. Then it was just your choice of which busted fusion monster you wanted. Exterio was on the menu, of course, but Tearlament was so strong that even going Stein for a Tearlament's Kit Kalos didn't feel that bad at all. Still, while that was a very strong line, it more or less got addressed by Elf getting banned instead. What really ended up pushing Stein over the top in the modern era was Super Heavy Samurai. With the new support, the deck could end really on almost any board it wanted, all while being super protective from basically every hand trap through making Barone or Savage Dragon really early into the combo. One of such lines was to search both Stein and Gimmick Puppet Nightmare through Gear Gigant X, and the Gimmick Puppet Link 2. At that point, you'd cheat out Stein and use its effect to summon Sanctifier so that you could use its effect to give your opponent the Nightmare, applying a lingering effect to them that prevented them from summoning for the rest of the turn. Granted, all of this nonsense was just showing off how busted the Super Heavy Samurai cards were, as getting enough materials to do all this certainly wasn't an easy deal, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and finally got Cyber Stein rebanned, hopefully never to return again. And finally, at number 1, we've got Imperial Order. This is a continuous trap that negates all spells on the field, but during each standby phase, you must pay 700 life points or this card is destroyed. Blanket negation on an entire card type is a really good effect, but there's a very good reason why IO was banned so quickly, while its counterparts for monsters and traps never were. First of all, it used to be that paying this card's maintenance cost was completely optional. That meant you could flip it in response to your opponent's spell and get the same value as something like a Solemn Judgment, then let it go away during your standby phase by not paying the cost, and then being able to play all of your spells. This is without even getting into the fact that negating spells is inherently the strongest effect, no matter how you slice it. Skill Drain inherently has counterplay, as there's a lot of ways to dodge its effect, or even play through it if your deck is very graveyard based. Decree could feel like a blowout versus trap heavy decks, but it did mean you were playing a relatively defenseless light deck yourself. But most important of all, these die to a really common spell that was seen tons of play. This meant that IO basically protected itself by negating most of its outs, heavily limiting how much you could do to play around it. There's also the fact that IO existed in an era where spells were by far the most ridiculous card type, with staples such as Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, and Delinquent Duo being around. This all led to IO being quickly banned back in 2004. But unfortunately, this wouldn't be where this card's story would end. In 2017, we would get a set called Duelist Saga, which included a ton of controversial erratas to old cards. Many of them just nerfed old behemoths into near unplayability, like what happened to CED and Brain Control. Some others did nerf the card, but just kept enough so that it would still be playable without breaking the game, like say the Rescue Cat or Future Fusion ones. However, the most baffling of them all by far was the errata to Imperial Order. They changed the card so that the maintenance cost wasn't optional and called it a day. And this was of course coupled with its removal off the ban list. This led to 4 long years of Imperial Order constantly being a threat in the metagame. Not being able to activate your own spells during turn 3 felt like a completely trivial matter now, as spells were the main way of breaking boards, and it could feel impossible to go second when starting into it. By now, there were also many decks that could very easily out their own Imperial Order if you needed to anyways, like Zodiac with Drident or True Dracos by distributing over it. The card was insane versus 95% of the decks, and the game often felt unlosable if you managed to open it going first. Imperial Order stayed legal for an embarrassing amount of time, enough that it felt like Konami was just ashamed to admit that their errata was a huge mistake. Though it was extremely good in decks that didn't really use spells like Altergeist, there really was little reason not to include it in almost every single strategy somewhere between your main and side. The card could get you victories against anything depending on your opponent's hand composition, but it felt especially mean versus decks that were really all spell-based like Striker and Branded. Although searching continuous traps isn't the easiest thing, there were many decks which could draw cards as they comboed or played Pot of Prosperity, giving them a disgustingly high chance to get the card when it mattered the most. Thankfully, the card would finally go on to be banned in 2021, after what felt like an eternity of having this sacky one-of card in the meta. Though there are some disgruntling powerful cards on this list, none of them earned its second banning as much as Imperial Order did, and it's still crazy to think how long it took for it to happen. And so there's no card more deserving of this first spot on the list, and it's guaranteed to not come back unless Konami wants to try to errata it again. However, by its track record, it would just lead us to seeing IO getting banned for the 3rd time instead.